Good morning and welcome to Live Adult Religious Education through the Orthodox Christian Network. We're doing this from the Greek Orthodox Church of St. George in Bethesda, Maryland. My name is Michael Haldus, and we have a very busy day at the church today, so forgive us for starting later than usual, and also forgive us in advance if you hear noise or coming in and out. We have basketball tournament, we have parish council elections and bake sales and all kinds of stuff. We're blessed, though. We have a thriving parish here. But today we're going to continue with what we've been talking about the last couple weeks, which under our broader theme of beauty, goodness, and truth, we've really been exploring the beauty of the human person and what it means to actually be a human person, other than what we think of as self-evident, being a human being, within the theology of our faith, within our sacramental understanding. There's more to being a person than just what's on the surface of being a person. So we've been delving deep into that, and we're going to go a little bit deeper today. For those of you that may have comments, please post them. Talk amongst yourselves out there. Whatever comments you have, I'll try to address as I see them. But I'm not really good at that, so just forgive me. But if there are any comments, I do look later and try to respond. So today I call this lesson, again, I always like to play with words. I'm calling it the slavery of human freedom, which may contradict, but as always, I have a purpose in saying that. So last week we talked about going deeper into, like I called it, becoming ourselves, what it means to be a human person. We contrasted this false notion of individualism, a little toddler out there, with human personhood. We explained that it's all, being a person in Christ is all relational, right? It's so much of our growth as people is dependent upon being relational, cleansing ourselves of sin, and then growing in the context of our relationships. We talked about how this is an embedded truth reflected in our understanding of God, the Holy Trinity, and how we see it also in the Eucharist when we all receive together the body and blood of Christ together. We confess with one mind and one heart, all of this relational. So today we're going to talk about what our understanding and experience of freedom means, or lack thereof, in terms of how we progress or regress as persons. And we're going to take stock of ourselves and see where we are on this continuum. So I'm going to start with a brief quote. Anybody ever hear of Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist? Yeah, okay. He lived last century, 1904 to 1980, but he said something that's quoted by one of our theologians. I'll get to that later. But he said something that's fairly provocative. He says, "Man is condemned to be free." So who wants to take a stab at whether they think that's true or false, or why? I'll pause for an uncomfortable moment of silence, let people think. Man is condemned to be free.
Well, the only reason, I'm sorry.
Please.
I think he's saying that is because we're, I wouldn't say doomed to make mistakes, but we'll eventually make mistakes.
We are kind of doomed to make mistakes in the sense of, because of what we think about sin and how it affects us. We're never going to make perfect choices 100% of the time. So in a sense, we're doomed to make mistakes. Go ahead, John.
We're responsible for our conscious decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And the consequences that come from bad decisions, as well as hopefully the benefits that come from good decisions.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say, the responsibility.
It sounds like.
Yeah. And I like this quote, but I read about him in the context of something else. So just to be clear, I'm not a Jean-Paul Sartre expert. So I didn't delve too much of what he meant, because I honestly didn't really care. I thought in terms of what I'm trying to communicate today, it was important. As an existentialist, I'm not quite sure what he meant. A lot of the existentialists I read were also atheists, so they had a different perspective. I don't know if he was or not. Do you know about him, Tina?
No.
Okay.
I'm just shocked he died in 1980.
Yeah.
I thought
he was older than that.
Yeah.
I thought he was more in the past than
Right.
that. Yeah. I didn't know that. I thought about this, and one of the things that struck me, and it probably struck me because I read it, I just don't remember, but it struck me was the question of, can we be free from freedom? And then what are the implications of that as persons?
But what does the question mean?
Can we be, well,
Right.
okay, anybody else want to
What does it mean to be free from freedom?
Well, we're born. Okay, here's what it means. We're born. We're born free. We're born with freedom, right? So we can't be free of it. It's part of our created existence, right? God made us free, right? We have freedom whether we want it or not. And so, and the next step is, okay, if that's true. What do we do with it? Where do we anchor our freedom? Right? Hey, Andrea. Don't worry about making noise. I already explained that there's going to be lots of that in and out today. Again, I'm saying it for a reason, not just to hurt our heads on a Sunday morning. Yeah.
It's a simple question. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to-
No, I know. No, I don't take it that way.
Perhaps a definition of to be free, free to do what?
To do what?
Yes, to do what?
Right.
And you are, but if there are choices, those are always, are not, yeah, they pretty much always are defined by somebody else besides yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that freedom is already restricted by who else has already made the decisions about what you can make decisions about.
Now you're hurting my head. I understand you, but I'm saying, yeah, this is what I never liked about the existential philosophers. After a while, it's like, okay,
It goes around in a
yeah, it just goes around in a circle. It's like, yeah, it doesn't go upwards per se, just circular. Yeah. Well, the point, one of the things in the context of being human persons and our faith, right? Freedom is a gift, right? Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
Our freedom is a gift, and then a lot of what defines us as persons is what we do with that gift, right? Okay, because and the reason I was bringing up, God created us, right? One of the things I think sadly seeps into human consciousness, especially when people are in pain, is this false notion that we ever, speaking about existential, that we ever cease to exist, right? There's no escape from freedom, so to speak. And I don't mean that in a dreary way. And why do I say that? Well, because what did Christ say about the resurrection? He said it in John. Remember? We talked about this before. I don't expect everybody to hang on every word I've ever said, but
You should tell us.
maybe in the interest of time, I should. Remember, he said that the hour is coming when all who are in the graves will hear his, Christ saying, my voice, and those who have come forth, and those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. So there's no ceasing to exist, right? In our faith, we believe what Christ says.
Mm-hmm.
And if we take it seriously, we live that way. But as I was thinking about this, he said those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. So to me, it's like a question is, hey, Ellen, then who are those who have done evil, right? Because Christ said in Matthew 7:11, he said, and he's just talking to a general audience. This is part of the Sermon on the Mount. He says, if you then, just talking to the people, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him? So here he is. He's calling the everyday person, pretty much, referring to them as evil. So what is it, I suppose, within our freedom that results in our condemnation? Ponder for a moment.
Say that again.
So Christ says some will go to the resurrection of condemnation, right? So linking that to this topic about freedom, what is it within our freedom? What is it? What do we do within our freedom, or what misuse leads to condemnation?
If we don't follow the way Christ tells us to live,
Mm-hmm.
we have to, and if we fail, we have to ask for forgiveness. If we don't follow what he's taught us and we never ask for forgiveness, then we'll be condemned.
Okay, I agree.
Occupation with self.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that too. Occupation with self. What else?
Although, having said that, people who are preoccupied with their passions oftentimes those people give tremendous gifts to the rest of the world. I'm thinking about Beethoven.
Yeah, we have to be careful with the word passions because that can mean a couple different things in
Well, I don't
Orthodox.
mean in the terms
Yeah, you
of
don't mean in
Eros, but I
right.
mean in the terms of the single-minded Einstein, like, what is this? How does it work?
Mhm.
And so on, so on. That sort of thing.
But
Yeah.
isn't that using the gifts God has given you for the betterment? of
Yeah, let's talk about
the
that for a
world?
minute because yeah,
I mean, and you could still, if you're deeply involved in a talent of yours and pursuing it, if it's for the betterment of the world and not just for your glorification, I think that's the difference.
yeah, we can't be too quick to judge about someone else's single-mindedness or what it looks like because, for instance, my understanding of the life of Picasso, for example, for all the wonderful stuff he gave, he clearly left a trail of personal ruin behind him.
Mm-hmm.
So that would suggest something not good, right?
Right.
But for others, this gets a little deep, so I'm going to try to keep it to the level that I can explain it, not get beyond myself, my own competence level. But Christ is the Logos, and He pours out the gifts of His own being to each of us in a way that's unique to us as our created persons. And just like we see in the Eucharist, we take the gifts, refashion them, and offer them back. And I don't know too much about the personal history of Beethoven, for example, but certainly when you study, beauty and artistry and people, that we can certainly see that their single-minded passion for what their giftedness and what they offer to the world is truly truly a gift of their own free will, their own free choose to offer that gift back, right? And we all are enriched from it. And one of the things that for example, I've been studying this quite a bit lately, but I think I've talked about it before, a lot of the modern notion of creating things is very effective and efficient, right? All that kind of thing with very economical or whatever. But in losing sometimes artistry within engineering or artistry within architecture, I'm reading about theologians and teachers making a connection to the diminishment of our personhood, to the diminishment of our spirituality, on slaying on this altar of effectiveness, right? Mm-hmm. And this lack of beauty and the lack of spirituality in things. And of course, even to talk about this, like someone could be listening to me right now and say, he's way out there, right? But think about your own professions. Think about whatever it is that you do, what you're bringing to it. And especially if you have a passion for it, is it just about bare bones effectiveness, or do you see mission in it, or do you see purpose in it? Do you see something higher in it that you're trying to honor by doing it, right? Whatever it may be. And this is why we don't confine spirituality just to Sunday school teachers or priests, right? And all of that enriches us as persons in what we do. And God honors that, right? He honors it because He's given us, we believe that our place in this world, our time, the people that are around us, every little thing is within, obviously within His purview, right? Not a sparrow falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. So within the freedom we have of the circumstances and the choices, every one counts, right? Make sense? Does it resonate? I'm trying to articulate, and I feel like it's in my head, but I don't know if I'm getting it out of my mouth the way I want to say it. So, okay, go ahead.
One year, this was in the 90s, but it was Metropolitan College of Swear.
Mm-hmm.
And it really hit me at the time because I was a young mother at the time. But he said, even if you're a young mother at home and you have young children and you're mopping the kitchen floor, but he said, if you're doing it like out of the goodness of your love for your family and whatnot, that's like a prayer to God, because you might not be finding a cure for cancer or whatever, but you're doing this to benefit your family.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, that really struck me because I thought, these mundane acts, like if we do it out of love, it is kind of a form of prayer.
It is, and I think when Paul talks about prayer without ceasing, which is, you read in the Way of the Pilgrim. Anybody ever read that classic work where he becomes prayer? And if anybody ever read Brother Lawrence, who worked in the kitchen? I don't think he was an Orthodox Christian, but he brought the same prayerful attitude to working in the kitchen. And but the point being is everything we do can be to the glory of God, even though it's not necessarily to the glory of man, right? But at the same time, it doesn't diminish worldly achievement. It's just that greatness isn't relegated just to worldly achievement. Great hearts and great souls are all over the place in places we don't even see or we'll never see. That's why we have a day for the saints who are unnamed, right? Because there's saints out there. Saints being those that have reached that that elevation in their involvement as persons, where they're so filled with God's love. So yeah, exactly. I remember studying that too, because at one point when I was going through that do loop of trying to figure out what I wanted to do and achieve and all that stuff, which is all good, I realized that I had misdirected my energy too much to something that wasn't not taking into account the other things. So the use of our freedom, every minute of every day we can have that choice to direct it without being, I don't mean to communicate like we have to be obsessive, right? Because sometimes we can fall into a spirituality where it's almost like you're so worried that God's going to not like you or diminish you. It's almost like you're trying to fulfill a checklist, right? So you're going to say something, John, or just tending? Okay. So this gets back to this condemnation thing, right? So that shouldn't scare us. I mean, it should in a sense scare us, because only in the sense that, alert us, right? That Christ says everybody's going to go this way or that way, sheep and goats, right? But it shouldn't necessarily worry us because of why. What do we, when we look at the person of Christ in the gospel, what do we see? He does. If you look closely, there's something he never does. No matter how aggravated he's getting at the audience he's dealing with, there's something he never does. No matter how sinful the person he's dealing with is, there's something he absolutely never does.
Doesn't really condemn them.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't condemn or reject them. Ever.
Did he condemn the Pharisees and the Sadducees?
He condemned their behaviors. But but the very fact that so much of the gospel accounts are dialogue with the people shows what he was trying to do was through love save them. But they were a stubborn bunch. And
hypocrites, you brood of
vipers.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah, well, because and then
That's so funny. He
Not a lot of wiggle room.
never said you're going to go to hell or you'll never
Okay.
be with my Father.
Yeah.
I guess that's the
Fair
point.
enough.
yeah, it is the point. Yeah, he reamed them good. And when I think I talked last week, when he drove them out of the temple, that wasn't just a mild crack of the whip. That was an extremely violent act. He was like berserk, right? So it wasn't like, I think several years ago, I think tongue in cheek, I taught this lesson called the dark side of Jesus, right? Not that he ever has a dark side, but we always tend to focus on his soft side, his gentle side, not the stern, accountable side, right? Because that's just where we are as a people in society now. We're so much on thought and feeling and softness, which is, it's all true, but it's only part of the equation, right?
So
Go
it's
ahead, Al.
interesting. I think that, so I find myself engaged in this debate, like the whole truth with power, or like speaking truth with love, right?
You're right.
And how like the balance of the love and truth, like I'm
We gotta go
in my
to
family,
yeah.
goes together,
Yeah.
right? And I'm kind of more love, and my husband is more truth.
But aren't you? I'm not picking like. But aren't you both love? It's just a different expression of it.
What's
Or-
that?
Isn't it both love?
They have to go hand in hand,
Yeah.
right? So, but I think that when Jesus is more compassionate, I think he's speaking to people with less power. What is hitting me right now? Because the
That's
people
true.
that are those people that you're saying that he got out the whip, they were in power.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's hitting me that they were less maybe vulnerable, right?
yeah.
And
No,
people who were maybe more vulnerable, who was perhaps more
Like
compassionate with,
Mhm.
prostitutes and
right?
and the
He wasn't
lepers and
getting
the
out his whip
beggars.
with them.
Yeah.
no, because what was going on back in those days were like they were making land grabs. The religious elite
Right,
were making
right,
land grabs. You know
right.
about that, right? And then they were
Right.
selling the land back to the
Yeah.
people they stole it from. It was awful.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was terrible what they were doing.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
So
Yeah, you really when you learn this stuff like more and more what's going on, you really realize why I call them hypocrites and brood of vipers.
mhm.
You know, if we were aware of that was going on with our religious leadership, right, or any leadership, we would be incensed, right? So
I take back what I said about he never condemned anybody.
well, I was trying to advocate for safe, like productive conversations
Right.
with because you engage with people in a way that would yield.
but sometimes
Yeah.
a productive conversation is do what I say and do it now. Don't ask me any questions. Because right? I'm not being tongue in cheek.
Right,
That's
no,
productive
I-
because sometimes someone's just not getting it. So you have to wield your authority and say, do it. I had to do that at work lots of times.
Right, if that's gonna, yeah. But certain, I mean, if we're trying to be like, if we're trying to engage in a conversation that involves,
Mm-hmm.
if we're trying to be like Jesus, what I'm saying, at certain
The way
times,
you're
it's like,
tra-
no. Sometimes Jesus was all, whip or whatever.
I'm just laughing the way you say, we're trying to be like Jesus because we have
No, I'm
to.
saying,
I don't want to be, but we
trying
have
be
to.
in love.
I want to smack you, but I'm going to be like Jesus. That's how that came out. That was funny.
This is spoken by the people who have had teenage children.
It's true. Yeah. I'm beating you out of Jesus, right? They were, but you're right though. I mean, again, it gets back to the giftedness we all have. Some, because I've actually had debates with Vasily too about certain issues, and my approach was different than his.
Mhm.
I don't know that it was who was, I wouldn't say right or wrong, but whose would be more effective.
Uh-huh.
But mine was at the
Right.
time I was saying, well, I'm trying to meet them where they are, and his was like,
Right.
you know what, just set the standard, and they'll come to it. And, there's truth in both of that, right?
Yeah.
So it really depends. But no, Christ never condemned anyone. Think about Judas, right? He didn't condemn Judas,
Yeah.
right? He never condemned him. He was offering the cup at the end. So really, when it comes to our freedom, the only thing the very fact that we're concerned about it actually is a good thing, right? Because it shows that we haven't crossed that place where, because the condemned are really, in the end, they're self-condemned. It's completely by the misuse and abuse of their own freedom where they've decided either God doesn't exist or I don't care, or it's inconsequential, to the point where, just like some of the Pharisees and Sadducees see in the gospel, reaching out to those people meant nothing. They didn't care, right? And that's really that's where condemnation comes in. It's self-chosen, and that's why freedom is so. I mean, obviously, it's kind of a state self-evident, but freedom's so important because it's a gift we're given. And then, of course, Christ says he wants us to. He designed us to be free in the right way for our own growth. But it's almost like, have you ever offered your kid? I can't think of a good example, but you've offered them something, and they've chosen something less than what you've offered them, or they make a choice that's less than what's good for them, and it just drives you insane, right? But they're not, but you can't reach them at the time. You just, they get, especially when they get past that age where they really have to listen to you. Yeah, I'm sure you could, but it's kind of, that's always, to me, that's always a good analogy for us, for those of us that are parents, at least, to go ahead.
Are you picking on our children? Like myself, my father taught me, anytime something goes wrong around me, the first place to look is in the mirror.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to set my own standards. My children are my children. And you know what? I think a lot of us who've gone through teenage kids, they're a lot better than we were. At least when I talk to my friends. But seriously, I know when I'm failing all the time. And I know when I'm making substandard choices. Take my kids out of this. It's here.
I wasn't
It's here.
picking on your
I'm
kids
screwing
personally,
up all
John.
the time.
I know,
Screwing up all
but
the time.
what I was trying to get at is,
I know what you're getting.
yeah,
I'm just saying, like, it's fun to talk about the children, but it's us.
it's always us.
Mm.
It's always us. But
It's us.
to sometimes to the extent we can to understand God's perspective, sometimes the best analogy is us as parents. That's all I was saying. But it's always
I know,
us.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm not being combative.
No, too bad.
That's you. You're not being combative. You're the combative.
You just ruined my fun.
I'm just saying, like, everything that you're saying
Yeah.
about our children, I'm thinking applies to me.
Yeah. It does. And that's how if you've helped produce better children than you, then you understand that.
Again, I'm sweeping the children off the table.
And I'm putting them back in.
I make substandard choices so much, and I know I should do better, and I fail to do better. And in my struggle to be Christ-like, I'm failing all the time. Not every single time. Every once in a while, there's a flash of goodness. But you know what I'm saying? But it's in the mirror. It's inward looking first.
I do know what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's why Christ, when you look at Christ himself, take the plank out of your own eye.
Right.
When you expand that out and you look at his other teachings and the fact that who was he dealing with all the time? It was the religious establishment. It was always from the inside out. He was dealing with the people that were entrusted but failed. And then, of course, that's a further continuation of what happened in the Old Testament. The hand-picked nation that God formed himself to take care of others, shepherd others, was
Less than worthy.
It's
Less-
failing all the time.
yeah. What did we hear the other night? The way Father Stephen put it, I think he was like cannibalizing their sheep, something like that. Yeah, but either way, yeah, exactly. So
And I would
Yeah.
also, excuse me,
Yeah.
but I would also say, consider mercy. Failure is an opportunity to recognize mercy.
Mhm.
And I think,
And ask forgiveness.
yes,
Mhm.
yeah.
Of course.
So all those opportunities of failure, or all those opportunities of choice, are opportunities.
yeah, failure becomes real failure when we dwell on failure as opposed to seeing it as a wake-up call, right? Because a lot of times, because of how we understand sin and how because of we can't escape the infection of it without Christ, then when we fail, it's a good opportunity for self-assessment. We don't want to linger there too long because then it becomes like you're almost self-obsessed. Oh, I fail. It becomes like a reverse form of pride. Like you're almost like, well, I feel so bad that I failed because I shouldn't have failed because I'm better than that.
And here I am again.
No, we're
and
not.
maybe,
That's the whole point.
suffocated in this.
Yeah. You're not. None of us are any better than what we are, right? So if in failure and unfortunately pain, suffering, trials, all those things we don't like, every single one of them is a wake-up call in a sense, right? It's something that God always uses in our life. If we continue to make choices within it that move us towards him as opposed to away from him, then we can not necessarily have to, and we can feel bad about our failures. We don't have to be weighed down by them to the point where we're just consumed by them, right? True, false, you agree, disagree?
Absolutely, you shouldn't obsess over things like that. Then it becomes a luxury.
That's why someone like St. Paul can like put out, I forget what epistle it's in, but he talks about that laundry list of all the things he was that weren't good. But I was a blasphemer, a murderer, I was whatever, all this stuff. But he says it with such, he's neither. It's such balance to it, right? Because he's so, Paul was so high in his understanding that he was so in touch with Christ that he could say all these things without being weighed down by them, right?
But he also spoke about them in the past because he has been forgiven of all of those sins.
He spoke about them in the
Because of
past.
Christ.
That's true, but he also says in Romans, he said in Romans was I think his first epistle was Galatians. So, the order of the Bible doesn't reflect chronology. There's a lot of different things, but he said in Romans, what I want to do, I do not do. And it basically said, no matter how good I am, I always mess up. So he even reckoned for all his growth and forgiveness, there was still going to be messing up, but he understood. He said, thank God for Christ, right? Because
And you didn't have kids.
touche, John.
At least that we know of.
Whoa, scandalous.
Just saying.
See, now I'm being very good. I'm not coming back at you, but those that had kids, we're not going to be combative. Okay.
So then going back to
Yeah.
the theme for today's class, so the slavery of freedom is the fact that we are condemned, or however we want to verbalize it, to have to make choices all the time.
Yeah, it's I think I've said it in a different way. It's not freedom. There's never freedom. There's freedom of choice, but never freedom from choice. Right? That's what it was, essentially just a different way of illustrating that point, and just a different way too of, because in the end, it's all the same truths, right? It's just sometimes we come at them from different angles to help embed them in our hearts, right? But the bottom line is we have free will, and within that free will, Christ desires that we exercise, because we see back in Genesis, it was exercised wrongly, right? And what was the result? So our lives are always the continuation of trying to go closer to Christ, closer to each other, and make good, loving choices within those relationships that cause us to grow as persons, and we become more and more of the human beings that he intended us to be, whatever circumstance and giftedness he bequeaths upon us, right? Go ahead, Andy.
Your point about freedom from choice, maybe that explains Cousin Zyke's line on his tombstone, which is, I hope for nothing, I fear nothing, I am free.
I hope for nothing. Yeah. I didn't know that was on his tombstone.
Yeah.
That is astonishing.
Yeah. I hope for nothing. I am nothing.
I fear nothing.
I hope for nothing. I fear nothing. I am free.
No,
Yeah.
it sounds bleak, and in one way, it sounds pretty bleak.
I didn't hear it that way. That's interesting, but
That's what I said. In
Yeah.
one way,
Yeah.
it sounds pretty bleak. In another,
Yeah, what was it again?
Cousin Zyke's on his tomb. It says, I hope for nothing, I fear nothing, I am free.
And you know that he was now with God, so he didn't have to fear anything. He didn't have to hope for anything, and he was free. There was a film about Cousin Zyke's in the last 5 years that I thought showed that he was really a devout Christian, even though he'd been excommunicated by the church. He had very deep faith. So
Archbishop Epiphyllus, I mentioned the other day, there was this, because I grew up, Cousin Zyke's was condemned by the church. But one of his lines that I found so fascinating, he said, blessed is he who can identify God in his many disguises. And then he said, whether it's a drink of fresh water in the morning or bouncing your child on your knee, or he even said, or the allure of a woman, he said, and I asked Epiphyllus about that. I said, is that wrong? Do you think that's inconsistent with orthodoxy? And he said,
No,
not at all.
not at all. We actually make those of us of faith and trying to. We all want to be the best Christians we can be, right? I mean, that's why we're in this room. That's why we come to church. But I think sometimes we all get so worried about not that we miss truth when it's other places, and we narrow it down. And one of the things we just a couple of weeks ago, we had the Doxicon Faith and Fantasy convention here. We're a bunch, and I'm one of these bunch, and we say this with love, nerds and geeks. We all love getting together, and our question is, so what's your geekdom? I'm Tolkien, I'm Star Wars, but the whole point of that is what you hear from these people with their stories is they found the pearls of Christ in these artistic works, right? And that's where we've said in here, if it's true, it's Christian, not if it's Christian, it's true. So that's why we have certain teachers in the faith. They may have not been saints because one of their teachings was wrong or heretical, but it doesn't mean everything was wrong. And I didn't know he was. What was he condemned by the church or?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know too much about him because by the time I encountered him, I think things had softened in that direction because
That's right. In his early writings, he would make fun of monasteries.
Oh,
what was
yeah,
going
yeah.
on in monasteries.
But he was supposed to get the Nobel Peace Prize, wasn't? Was that
Yeah.
one? Or Nobel Prize in Literature? And I think the Greek government prevented him from getting it. Now, I hope I'm saying that right. I know they prevented him from getting some special award.
Some parts of
Well,
the church or something.
Oh yeah, we do that. I mean, we're in the East, we're not big on St. Augustine, but the fact of the matter is, he was a wonderful teacher because he wrote retractions at the end of his life of everything he thought he got wrong. That guy did not have an ego. He was a seeker of the truth, right? And so I think this is now I get into my opinion. I sometimes think we give him too much of a bad rap because there were other saints. There are other ones that did not retract, right? That things they didn't get right. So, I don't know. The bottom line is we should probably be slow in our free choices to condemn too quickly before we really explore what's, someone's work, someone's teaching, really understand where they're coming from. I mean, the Orthodox Church itself has always been, when it's in its best, it's always been very slow to deliberate and figure things out and be patient and not jump the gun on certain things, just like we are as people. When we're patient and we endure, I mean, with ourselves, I won't say our kids because John will get mad at me, but with ourselves, right? We'll be patient with ourselves.
I don't get mad at anyone.
I know. But you are a better man than I. I will tell you that.
I'm struggling, okay?
I get mad first and I work back.
No, actually, to that point,
Yeah.
take your humorous comment and
Yeah.
bring it back to the
Sure.
conversation. I actually realized, and I try to use these euphemisms, I don't get older. I'm trying to get wiser
Mhm.
and more distinguished
Yeah.
as the years pass, but not older. But I've learned to be a lot more patient, and where I might have been quicker to judge when I was younger, I realize now, that there are a lot of things I don't know about an individual or a situation or anything like that. And I just try to be more patient and to learn more about why something may have happened before I crystallize any thoughts about it. And I think that's probably just part of the human condition. You get older and you get wiser because of experience.
Hopefully. Yeah. I'm not being tongue in cheek. I've known some people that the older they've gotten, the meaner they've gotten, and they're not always wiser. A lot of times, I hope maturity and life experience causes wisdom in us.
I got to tell you, one of the great surprises to me in getting older. First of all, the good news is the whole brain does not go at once, but
Right.
the part with names is gone.
Yeah, we were just saying that the other day, right?
However, the thing that, and you obviously can't speak extemporaneously like you used to be able to, but the bizarre thing is that at 75, I really could sort of immediately assess something much better than I could at 65 or at 55. So there is something that happens that I guess you have seen enough examples of what works and doesn't work that you can reach these conclusions much earlier when you're older than when you're younger.
There is certainly a lot of truth to that, Andy, where like in our personhood, there is certain wisdom that just comes with age. I said that not too long ago. It was a discussion where it was an older person, older than me, and we were talking, and I was like, there's a lot of things we can dismiss, but we shouldn't become arrogant, and we should listen to what she says, because there's certain things she's just going to know at 79 that we don't, and that's just the end of that. I don't care how high our IQ is or whatever. There's just things that come with that, and it's a more beautiful thing too, obviously, when we see it in the saints' lives, right? When they've been so close to Christ and others, that wisdom just flourishes, because Christ is the Logos, right? He is, one understanding of Christ is he is wisdom incarnate. And we see that in Proverbs 8:22-30. If you've never read that, read that passage. It talks about how wisdom was there from the beginning, and he was the craftsman at his side. It's a whole Trinitarian Old Testament expression of creation, right? The embedded. So there's certain things. I'm going to read you this one quote that kind of wraps up this segment of the conversation. It's This is from Metropolitan John Zazoulis. Do you guys know him at all? He's one of our brilliant theologians. Metropolitan Callistus were referred to him as the greatest living Orthodox theologian. So that's pretty high praise, right? Coming from who many of us thought was the greatest.
Yeah.
So he said this, and this is where I got the quote from. He said, "Freedom led the slavery. The most paradoxical thing that lies in the fact of freedom is that man cannot free himself from it. If he wanted to do so, unless he extinguishes himself completely, this makes John Paul Sartre's man is condemned to be free sound quite true. For the alternative which freedom poses for man's existence lies between accepting existence as a whole as something which man freely partakes or making existence something which man controls himself." I see frowns at the end.
That last part. What was that last part again?
He said, "For the alternative, and for the alternative which freedom poses for man's existence lies between accepting existence as a whole as something in which man freely partakes, or making existence something which man controls himself." That last part caught my attention too. That's why I included it.
I stumble over man controls himself.
As we should, actually.
In many ways, it seems to me, is something of an illusion. And when it's embraced, I have to have control over this. That can be so consuming
Great.
that all else fails.
I like your choice of words there. So with the remaining minutes, we'll explore this a little bit. We'll probably pick this up when we come back in 2 weeks, but I wanted to get this in before. Yeah. So what, go ahead, John.
I don't know how I can control existence when existence is influenced by everyone else around me, right? I mean, we live in relational lives.
I agree. We can't.
So all I can control, and this is not
Excuse me.
This is not my own idea. This is borrowed, obviously. All I can control is how I respond or react or adapt to existence or the actions of others.
Right.
I can't control all of my existence unless I'm completely isolated from all other human beings. But as long as I'm in relationships of one type or another, the actions and words of others will affect my existence.
And so what is the response after that recognition that I cannot control the actions of others? How do you respond? I don't mean you personally, how do we,
Well,
as a nation, as a people, as an individual?
That's the freedom that we're talking about here. The freedom to make, hopefully, the right choices, to make Christ-like choices in my life.
Back to Christ.
Right?
Get back. But I mean, have you ever encountered, or maybe you felt like, you were this type of person yourself at some point in your life, but have you ever encountered somebody that is super controlling and really looks at it really seems like they're trying to control like every aspect of life?
They
I
can't.
don't know.
They don't.
I would venture.
So what do you, I mean,
People has tried that at one time.
yeah, I mean, it's part of who we are. A lot of time we try to control everything, but what's the usual result of that? I mean, there's not one answer for that, but what are some of the things that go along with that type of attempt? Rebellion's one. Frustration.
Anger.
Anxiety, I would imagine, right? Because you can't control everything, and trying to control what you can't control, some anxiety. What's that? You flee that person. If you are that person, you try to flee yourself.
That's on an individual basis. But I mean, if you look at it on a worldwide, Ukraine, I say you belong to me. No, we do not. We have our rights.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, leaders and people of power have a special responsibility in what they've been gifted. I mean, that goes down all the way to our homes, right? Whatever we have, and so we can't look to them and condemn them any worse than us. It's just that there's greater responsibility with certain places that we've been put in life, right? And that's what Christ said that's why he was so hard on the religious leaders, because they were given such responsibility to do.
They accepted that responsibility, expanded it in most cases too. So there is also not only given responsibility, it seems to be given responsibility, but accepted responsibility, and then built upon that. And then you're culpable in your own.
Some did very well with it, some didn't, right? But yeah, the control thing, we've talked about this different points and times over the years in here, but the control thing when it comes to freedom is something that I zoned in on, because if what I'm about to say, I'm going to oversimplify, but there's like three things that typically stunt our spiritual growth. One's fear. One is an unwillingness to learn, to be essentially unteachable, right? We're gods in our own mind. And control. An overinflated or misdirected sense of control. And certain holy fathers, certain modern teachers will say that when we fall prey to those things, it ends up leading us to participate in the demonic. Now, not demonic like head turning, all that sensational thing, but that anything that's sinful by definition in our faith is demonic in its nature, right? And that's why Christ said in the Gospel of John, he said to the religious leaders, he said, you follow the will of your Father, right? Because of what they were doing, right? And he said, when we see this too, where when Christ got crucified, who did they choose when they were offered a choice, Christ or Barabbas, right? Who did they choose? Remember what Barabbas means? You remember what Barabbas means? Son of the Father. So they chose the wrong son of the wrong father. That teaches us. Yeah. Abba. Remember Abba? Remember you said Abba, Father, Simon Bar Jonah, son of the Father. Yeah. So when we look at that deeper, we see the people chose. Who did they choose? They chose the person that was fighting the Romans tangibly through violence, right? And why did they do that? Because they didn't see God for who he was. That's why all these people, he says in John 5 or whatever it was, search the scriptures. Anybody ever listen to Dr. Jeannie Constantino? That's her phrase for search the scriptures. You can search the scriptures till you're blue in the face. If you don't know God, you're going to learn nothing, because the authority in the church lies in the Holy Spirit, right? So if we don't read the scriptures with the Holy Spirit, we're not going to know anything. We can be intellectual giants and memorize it and be able to talk all this stuff and really sound impressive, but we're not going to know anything. That's why even in the sacraments, what are the differences between the West understanding of the sacraments and the Eastern understanding of the sacraments? The West believes when they consecrate it, the power is in the sacrament. We don't believe that. We believe the power is always God through the sacrament. So that's a difference, right? If the cup is blessed, and then that becomes the vehicle of power or whatever, that's different than it's still the Holy Spirit, right? So that's why, again, getting back to the freedom, that's why our freedom of choice always has to be seeking God through the Holy Spirit, because that's how we understand. Doesn't matter what our IQs are, doesn't matter what our education is. That's why you see saints from all walks of life. That's why you see great Christians from all walks of life. All equally celebrated. So. And that's why I say, so control, that's why Christ says, he says, I've come to, when he announces ministry, bring liberty to the captives, right? It's a message of freedom. John 10, give you the abundant life. It's all about freedom from this stuff.
I have a quick question. I'm sorry. What you read before, when you said
what I
the
read?
part about
Oh,
control,
yeah.
was that the person like being too controlling of
You guys got to roll? Okay. We're going to break in a minute anyway. Go ahead.
Were you saying like being too controlling of teaching your child, or was it being too controlling studying the scripture?
It can be all the above. It's more of an attitude of the heart, where you're so controlling that the person studying, raising their children, whatever. If the attitude of your heart is one where you always believe you're in complete control, you're striving to be in complete control. That's what I'm talking about. And because it doesn't mean, like, I wouldn't worry about it in terms of, some of us are much more, we're engaged in such a way that it could appear controlling, but it's not. We're just trying to do our best to direct or whatever. It's really in here. That's what it gets down to. Like, you can be as prescriptive with your children as you want to be, but deep down in your heart, I'm not in total control. I'm just trying to love my kids the best I know how, right? Or another thing of, like, you can slip into it. Now, John, I can talk about kids because he's not going to yell at me. Or another thing could be, if you really believe, if you do this, this will result in it. If you do everything I say, that you will turn out perfect because I know. But it doesn't work that way.
It is amazing, isn't it, as parents, when we compare, when we're talking to our kids and telling them this and they buy it all. And then you realize when you were that age and you believe your parents just knew everything, and you realize they probably knew less than you do.
Yeah.
It's just hard to imagine because the perspective of an
I know.
adult from the child's perspective is just all knowledge.
I think of the continuum too, as you at one point you believe your parents are right about everything, then they're wrong, right about nothing, and then they're semi-right, it just depends. But the bottom line is to the choice thing is if we go through our lives like, it's almost like we have an attitude we created ourselves, right? It's that attitude without that humility that acknowledges, no, we didn't come from ourselves. We were created, and we can't control everything. And some of that's a process, right? For some it's lessening control. For some it's actually being a little more aggressive. We're too passive. It just depends on the individual. So, all right, I'm going to end there because we're a little past time, but we started late. Ellen, do you have any final? You look like you're pondering something. I don't know if you had a final.
No. I was just, it's
Okay.
just like, I think I was so different than my husband's upbringing and my kids. I don't know where they're at since we're so different,
We go through the same debate all the time, right? And so she will enlighten you more than I ever could, obviously.
It is astounding, though. I got to say that you raise all your kids the same, and they all come out so very different.
Yeah.
We're all so very different. Everybody really is dealt a different hand.
Yeah.
Some of it is chemical, some of it's environmental, but it's so different.
Yeah, it is. Well, we only have one, so we're the eternal rookies. So I really shouldn't say anything about kids. What do I know? So anyway, all right. Well, listen. Let's So next Sunday we won't be having this because it's American Thanksgiving, and so we will return. I think it's December 4th is the next Sunday. We'll return, and we're going to pick up here and continue this discussion for another week or two, however long it takes. So God bless everyone. For those of you celebrating Thanksgiving, have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we will see you in a couple